Hi, everybody. Greetings. Welcome to a live stream conversation with me, David Drabkin from Pink Elephant, and also Mirari, with a friend of mine in Portugal, Anna Farkas. It's lovely seeing you. I saw you a couple of weeks ago in ICPR. So, how are you today?
Yes, indeed. Great. It's great to be back in Portugal, and it was awesome to be at ICPR.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was amazing. I'm still recovering. I picked up a bit of a cold there, as did a few other people. It
Mm-hmm.
was a really special time. So, we'll talk about our takeaways from ICPR because it really was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to tell people what we're here to talk about. So Anna's done this amazing thesis that she was presenting on at ICPR around psychedelic therapy training. So what makes a good training course? Do we know? And how good are the training courses out there? And the reason I'm asking Anna is because we here at Mirari are developing our own training course. So I'm curious to see from Anna's perspective, from the criteria and the data that she's been pulling, are we going along the right lines? What is it that practitioners really need to know in the real world? So that's what we're here for. We'll chat for about half an hour. Feel free to put questions or comments in the box and we'll do our best to bring them into our conversation. And if you would like to find out any more information about us here at Mirari, it's Mirari, Mirari.academy. All right, Anna, tell
Yeah.
us about you. So yeah, what's your life looking like personally and professionally?
Okay. I'll do the brief rundown. I started my professional career as a dancer in the arts. I went into teaching artist lifestyle, and then I became a kind of health and wellness practitioner. I was teaching yoga retreats all around the world and training programs and etc. And then COVID hit. I did a big career shift. I trained for 4 years with Gabor Mate and then did this MS Ed, focusing on psychedelic practitioner trainings when I was in Brussels. So that's the quick and dirty on my background. So I really have kind of a holistic perspective on moving through training programs, but also being in the yoga world and kind of seeing the hype and the kind of
Mm.
wild expansion, and then the kind of, oh, let's back up and like, what is this all about? What are we doing here? Like, what are we really trying to support? And I see a similar kind of trajectory in the psychedelic field. So that's been interesting just to kind of see that and be a part
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. Quite a few people have said to track the yoga boom or even the cannabis industry boom is helpful for understanding what's been going on in psychedelics, which is kind of coming on later. From a training perspective, your thesis was titled "Psychedelic Education: An Exploratory Study on Psychedelic Assisted Therapy Training."
Mm,
So you wrote a really long thesis. I think it was 20,000 words. Yeah, so I didn't read every single one of those words. Was it 20,000 words?
something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so congratulations. Well done, you did it. Um,
Mm.
what would you tell people is some of the main findings from that 20,000 word thesis that you came out that these are the really important key takeaways for people to know about?
Mm-hmm. Um, that's a big question, so I'll try to be as concise as possible.
Thank you.
Um, so there were a few key strengths that really kind of came out. Um, uh, a few of them that really stand out. One is an inclusion of a practicum. So really, this notion that we can have all of the theory possible, but if we're not actually going through the motion and experiencing that kind of live one-on-one element, then it's we'll eventually get to the practicum when we start working with patients or clients, but ideally we can do that in a setting that has a really strong container of holding, both for practitioners as they're learning and also for clients. And leaning into that is also an extended mentorship model. So even once the training is done, whether it's 6 months or a year or maybe even longer, there's really this ongoing lifelong learning and development and support and communities of care for the practitioner too. So I think a lot of times in like clinical Western models, we really focus on clients client care and client safety, which of course is important, but really taking a holistic perspective and looking at everything. So those are a few elements. Also, diversity is super important, and not necessarily in the way that we think. Of course, we need diverse, bodies and voices, but what came up in the research was interesting things like, if we're going to be meeting challenging experiences with people in the psychedelic space, with clients, then we need to also be able to meet those same challenging experiences, which sometimes comes up with diverse voices, diverse opinions. So kind of like building that window of tolerance, as you might say, for practitioners, so that we can hold that also for our clients.
That's a beautiful point. There's loads of things I'd love to follow up on. Maybe just on that one.
Mm-hmm.
That is hard to teach, Anna. How do we teach that? And I've got my answers and how I'm intending to do it. But what you're saying is it's not a theory, it's practical. Like, you have to be able to do it yourself. And the more challenging the experience your client's going through, the more challenging that will be for you. And you might be feeling it in your body, your nervous system. Your mind might be reacting or disassociating. You might be being triggered. You might have countertransference. What are some ways that literally a training program could help a student to gain those skills? You've already mentioned things like practicum and kind of community of care, but more specifically, are there any particular modalities that help students develop these inner competencies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, one thing that came up both in the research and also, from my own professional work is a trauma-informed approach. So really being aware of not only this kind of like eye on our client or the patient, but also having one eye on ourselves. So being able to do our own inner work, and that means like probably having a regular, therapeutic relationship or therapeutic container that we have, whether it's weekly or monthly. Doing check-ins, not only, okay, how is the content of the learning modules of a training program, but also, how are you personally doing, and maybe even having space within that training program to like do that self-work. Hey, this is coming up for me. I'm getting, a therapeutic model within the training program, I think can be really helpful. Not only as a way of like supervision for what's going on with the clients, but also, of course, what's going on for ourselves.
Thanks, Anna. There was a really powerful quote from someone you interviewed, a student from a training course, and they said, quote, "Just because you finish this online thing, this course, and then sat for 2 days in a retreat, doesn't mean you know how to facilitate." So how do we distinguish competence from completion? I'm wondering. What is it that students need that's not just theory, that we can gain through ongoing professional development, but also being in community of care? More like thinking years ahead, like what is it that evolves? I know your study wasn't over multiple years, but do we have a sense of how competencies evolve and grow over multiple years?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that brings it into like a bigger perspective. Like how do we learn? And I think in a way, what's coming up for me, anyways, is like this notion of humility. Like the most advanced practitioners I know, both in the kind of yoga body somatic space and also the psychedelic space, they don't think they know everything. There's this element of humility where there's a curiosity that's always present.
Yeah.
And I think that like knowing we're not going to have all the answers, and we really need each other. We need other practitioners. We need to stay curious about the client's experience and not just what we think they need. I think that element of like unknowing is a deep knowing in a
Yeah.
kind of like kind of ironic way, in both the education field and also in the psychedelic space.
I love that. I'm going to have to get into that one with you.
Yeah,
So
it's a rich soil there.
unknowing. So in a sense, we're taking these training courses to unknow what we know already, what we think we know, or what our knowledge or lack of knowledge is basically an obstacle. And I'll just share quickly, Anna. So, I'm a clinically trained social worker, psychotherapist. I've done psychoanalytic training. I've done CBT and all of that stuff. I didn't get any training in psychedelics in my social work master's degrees. So as I started to become more familiar with psychedelics and start to support people that use psychedelics, and then started to teach people how to support people at psychedelics, at each of those stages, I was going through a different process of unlearning myself. And to be honest, Anna, one of the biggest things I learned is when I was a teacher, it was around getting out of my head and getting more embodied. And you're a yoga teacher. It literally took me 10 years to realize that I'm not really in my body. That what does my body feel like? Do I have a sense of whether I am embodied right now or not embodied right now? And how important, crucially, it is to know if I'm embodied. If not, how do I get back in there? Because I can't support someone else if I'm not embodied. I'm putting myself at danger as well. So, for me, that unknowing was deeply powerful and kind of humbling, because I realized I'd learned how to be this clinical director and social worker in a hospital, but there was so much that I'd learned that wasn't useful, or was actually a bit of an obstacle. Or it basically put a little bit of a, I'd say, an impediment, like a barrier between me and the person that I was trying to relate to. And psychedelics, therapeutic rapport and alliance building, the relational connection, that is a determinant of the outcomes. Am I connected to myself and to this person? And do they feel connected and safe with me here? So how do you teach that? So anyway, that was a bit of a long one I went on.
Totally. No,
But the question is about unlearning. So what do we need to unlearn, and how do we unlearn this stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I think what you touched on, David, is so essential. And I was just looking to see if it was from Janice Phelps's study, which came out in 2017. And my research was a bit of a continuation of hers. Like, okay, this happened, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. When I started my research, I wanted to see, since we've had this boom, and of course, Michael Pollan's book came out, and billions of dollars now in psychedelics, et cetera. What's changed, and where do we go from here? And one of the first things that she listed under clinical competencies necessary for effective therapists was empathetic abiding presence. And it's a phrase that also Gabor Mate uses, and I think it really touches on what you're saying, which is we can have a lot of theory, and that's wildly important. Of course, we need this knowledge to put into context what's happening, to say, okay, maybe there's transference, we need all the lingo and the wisdom of Jungian philosophy and all this stuff, right? And at the end of the day, people can feel if we're present with them or if we're in our head somewhere off. And especially when clients are in a psychedelic experience, they're even more sensitive, right? Their proverbial chakras are all open. And either we're attuned and we're present with them. And how do we do that? It's partially is that like practitioner work of being present with ourselves. And if we can be present and embodied and really have like continual grounding practices that we do, whether it's meditation, whether it's hiking up a trail, whether it's a yoga practice, or singing, painting, whatever our embodiment practice is, that kind of is regular and centering and grounding us, and allowing us to be present for ourselves so we can be present for our client. I think that in some ways is going to trump the book study, the theoretical knowledge, and yeah, that's what I think our folks are going to be much more supported by, in a way, or at least as much as.
Yeah. And was there, I don't know to what extent you could track causation in your thesis, but I would love to know, is there a causation between in-person training that includes, say, an in-person practicum, experiential retreat, and competencies versus, in a sense, the other arm of this study would be if everything's just purely online and remote?
I wasn't able to track that But I think that in some ways, because of the length of the programs that are, kind of the bulkiness of time for most programs, I think it's just not realistic to have in-person trainings. Maybe there's modules that are in person. Maybe there's, somewhere maybe at the beginning, middle, and end, or something where there's an, in-person requirement or something like that. But if somebody's actually doing a training that's going to be a 6 months long or a year long, it's for most lifestyles generally, and the way that we generally multitask and are, working online, or, whatever, have families, etc. I didn't actually track the trainings that, whether they were inline or in person, online or in person. Um, uh, Although there was some data that pointed to kind of the challenges of being in a university system as opposed to being, through a for-profit or a nonprofit organization, and that can have some restrictions, being part of, say, Johns Hopkins or Harvard or wherever. Those do tend to have restrictions that can impede the quality of training, is what came up. So that was also interesting, that I didn't quite expect.
Fascinating. Yeah, the ability of a program to, in a sense, take risks a little bit,
Totally.
with some of the topics that it covers, because psychedelics, it's still emerging, it's still grey, there's still a lot of stigma. How do we talk about it? And when it comes to certification, I'll be honest with you, Anna, we are being really clear with our certificate in interdisciplinary psychedelic studies and practice. We're not certifying students to do something they're not already kind of within their scope of practice, kind of qualified to do. So it's not a certification to break the law and do whatever they want, or to be a therapist if they're not already a therapist. So this idea that what are we certifying students for is different to what are they actually able to do, and their competencies kind of map. And one thing that we're wanting to do, I'll just introduce it to you as well. And then if anyone wants to check it out, go to mirari.academy. You spell it Mirari, Mirari. So our foundation program is 12 weeks long, Anna. The last 2 weeks, students are presenting what they've learned, how they've grown, what their learning gaps are, what their scope of practice competencies maps to, and what their limits are, and they're mapping like a 90-day plan and then a 12-month plan of professional development. And then throughout the preceding 10 weeks, they're working with an avatar case study that they choose at the beginning, and then they take through the 10 weeks. And as we get more theoretical content, more interactive experience, then they role play their avatar week by week by week, according to the changes that is happening in that avatar's simulated life, around the weekly topic. And then in the weeks 11 and 12, then they present, this is who my avatar was, this is what they went through, this is how I helped them. So that's still not in person, but just having this this role play in triads, from what I've seen, is really valuable. So maybe just to talk about what is the benefit of role playing, and maybe even, I don't know if you noticed any differences between dyads or triads, where in the triad, that third person is the observer. And I think compassionate inquiry does that too, when you've got the third. Yeah. So let's just talk about role plays, dyads, and triads in that case.
Yeah. I think that model is so helpful. There's many songs about 3 is the magic number and whatever, but that even nonviolent communication, I think, talks about the I, the you, and the we, that triangle. And it's important because then it's not just, kind of an echo chamber or one and then the other, but it adds this third dimension of the observer. And it also gives an awareness of our, kind of bringing it back into that holistic space of somebody can observe and give feedback, and then you're practicing also receiving feedback. So there is that, not only that you're giving, but you're also in a receptive state. And I think that's something that we didn't touch on, but this notion of receptivity um, is is essential. And I don't think that you need to be, say, some practitioners are like, oh, I take a little dose of the medicine too, so I'm like more receptive. Like, I don't necessarily think that's essential, and that's definitely not what I studied. So so I'll just leave that to the side. But I do think that in a case of triads, it can be really important for the person who is again having one eye on themselves, having one eye on the client, and then also having like this third set of eyes that's both on the practitioner who's practicing, and the client, or the role play, or the avatar, to really integrate and have a perspective that you maybe hadn't thought about. Again, that kind of like, well, I don't know what I don't know. And seeing that from a different perspective is such, I mean, it's such a gift. Like, feedback, receptivity, like that is,
Yeah.
that is what we do when we're learning. We're getting feedback and we're integrating it. And yeah.
And I'm just thinking from the perspective of unlearning, like we were just talking about, getting that feedback is probably a bit of a catalyst. It helps us to unlearn what it is I need to unlearn the most a bit more effectively, and be really clear to receive that feedback. Okay, let me try and unlearn that. Let me try and do that differently. Why did I do it like that? Why did I say that? Why did I move my body in that way? Or did my face do this? Or did I take a big deep breath in that moment? I didn't know I did that. Thanks for telling me.
Yes, totally, totally. As a dancer, I learned that, when teachers gave us feedback, it meant they saw something in us, and we were trained that like feedback was a good, like the more feedback you got, the better. But I know in a lot of kind of cultures and whatever, feedback, um, or corrections, or whatever you want to call it, some people can take that really personally, and they're like, oh, I did bad, I did wrong, I need to, my whatever, all this stuff can come up. But I think that like there's just such rich soil there. Again, I'm going back to the earth, but there's rich soil there,
Yeah.
and feedback is so essential, whether it's from a romantic partner, or from a training program, that capacity to say, oh, let me consider um, where I hadn't considered before.
Yeah. There's a controversial topic I want to go into with you, Anna, and
Sure.
you might be able to guess, but it's been debated in the psychedelic ecosystem for years around this question: should practitioners have experience with psychedelics themselves?
Mm, mm,
Um, and I don't know that there's necessarily a right or wrong answer to it, but it's been asked a lot. And in a sense, I want to ask this question to you around maybe broadening the question to be: should practitioners that work with people that use psychedelics have their own familiarity with non-ordinary states of consciousness themselves, would you say? Any
mm.
research data you found, or any, professional opinion that you have?
Yeah, it was it's interesting. I was surprised at what I found, because I went in, and this was again my own hubris, my own thinking. I knew what the research was going to say, and as a researcher, ideally we're unbiased, and it really checked me, because
Mm,
I was surprised when people that I interviewed, particularly for the qualitative part of this, um, and people who, I won't reveal any of my sources, but people who are deep in the psychedelic space, and very well respected and whatever, um, said, if they can really be present with their client, it's unnecessary.
mhm.
It might be great, it might be helpful, but it's not essential if they have this capacity to really be present for themselves, and present for their client. Um, and yeah, it was interesting to find that and to hear that from certain respondents, um, and then of course I did get other respondents who said no, it's absolutely essential, um, and so that's a kind of a both and.
Mm,
So yeah,
yeah. Um, I'm thinking that we've got time for one or two more
sure.
topics to go into. There's been one topic we've, I think, lightly explored, and that's supervision, and kind of ongoing mentorships, internships, call it what you like. There's also intervision, which is something a little bit new that I've been looking at. And this is, again, something that we'll be working on here at Mirari and providing to our students and just to the community is supervision, intervision, internships. And there was something in your study that showed that I think you looked at 300 different programs as well. We should just say that. So your 20,000 words somehow,
Mm.
analyzed 300 different training programs all over the world. But one of the findings that you
Mm.
had is that supervision and ongoing mentorship was
Yeah.
kind of excluded from those courses. So it's almost like you do the course, you get your certificate, great, goodbye. What happens? What do you now need? And who's kind of in a sense tracking you and supporting you? So
Yeah.
tell me, what are you finding and what should there be as we start to build this system out over the next few years?
Yeah, yeah. So I found that that was really strong from both respondents in the quantitative and the qualitative part of my research was this real necessity for ongoing support for the practitioners, just like happens in a in clinical therapeutic psychotherapy, psychoanalysis generally, although sometimes after a certain point it kind of like tapers off, and okay, you maybe need to do some continuing ed credits or something, but there isn't like a really robust community where you can check in and say like, hey, I just had this client and like this happened, and like, can anybody around to talk about it, just like you might do in an indigenous community where there's
Mm,
a shaman and a village, and this notion of systems of support, um, especially like care for the carers is a catchphrase that I've kind of been bringing in, is really supporting the people who are supporting other people, and this necessity for it to be ongoing. I interviewed one woman who said these training programs should be 21 years. And of course that's like not actually um, realistic in the world that we live in, but I think that that notion of like, okay, maybe the training program is a few months in itself or whatever, um, but that this support and this growth and this
mm,
continuing self work, continuing group work is really ongoing. And to be honest, like we all need that, whether we're psychedelic practitioners or not. Like, don't we all need communities of care and
yeah,
support?
yeah,
Professionally, personally, like we cannot do it on our own. We try. We think, okay, I'm gonna, yeah, like none of us are doing it on our own. We're all supported. And so let's be really honest about it. Let's be really deliberate about it. Um, and okay, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you. Please come back. No, that was great. Communities of care were mentioned in the Embark model.
Yeah.
Alex Belser and Bill Brennan, and that's also one of the models that we've kind of adopted for our course. And then also Rosalind Watts as well speaks about um, the her ASA community, so acceptance, commitment, embodiment, and restoration, but belonging to this community of practice and going over 12 months together, so growing. And I think some of our unlearning, Anna, is that we purchase a product, we consume it, and then we become it. We are it. It becomes us. So we get the certificate, and great, now I can go and do what I wanted to do. Now I've got permission, but it's not getting permission. It's this. So the unlearning is that things take 21 years. And this is the beginning, and it's really doesn't mean it's not helpful. It's not crucial. It is crucial. It is helpful, but it's not everything. It's necessary, but not sufficient. but it gets you to the next step. And then what is my next step or my next 10 steps? Okay, let's take that next one and then take it from there.
Totally, totally. When I agree 100%.
Mm. One final question, Anna, that stands out to me from your thesis. You found out that half of the respondents, the students, practitioners that had been in the courses, they said they didn't consider their program to be a safe space to ask questions. Now, because we're dealing with something incredibly complicated,
Yeah.
complex, interdisciplinary, stigmatized, in the gray zone, those, like the ability to ask questions, to be vulnerable, to trust and feel safety, to me, that is crucial. So
Yeah.
what's going on there? Why weren't many or enough students feeling safe? And how do we inculcate that in our training programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was also kind of shocked at that number and a little disheartened, just a little
Mm,
bit like, oh man, that sucks. Like even in these spaces where we're still in some ways not quite hitting the mark for many people. And I think sometimes within training programs and what I heard from respondents was there's just like not there's just not time built into it, and and also accessibility of the teachers. So maybe they're there, okay, you're in this container, you have whatever you need to get through in your curriculum competencies, but then can you email the teacher afterwards? Can you facilitate, or whatever whatever terms we're using in this space, but are they available, not only like physically but energetically? Do they have a million things going on? Are they like one of these, like, I don't know, a Rick Doblin or something, who's like I'm part of the training program, but like he just like does like one recorded video and then like can you actually reach out to people, and are they energetically available to if you're having a hard time, is there again this like reciprocity, not only among training participants, but also a reciprocity and a receptivity for the faculty also. I think that's really important, and something that you sometimes get in academic models, but you sometimes don't. And I think people, particularly with the content here, they're really craving it, because it is so sensitive.
yeah, really, really good point. Thanks, Anna. Um,
Yeah.
so this was a treat, and honestly, it's so important that your work happened, because we're at a really crucial point where things are kind of scaling, gaining traction. We're developing the systems from a healthcare and policy and reimbursement perspective and policy. But if we don't get the training piece right, we're in trouble. So we have to, I think, catch up a bit with what the research shows. So thanks for adding to our research knowledge and kind of best practices. Really helps us know what kind of courses to build. Before we say toodaloo, just tell folks, how they can hear more about you or contact you if they want to.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. You can check out my website. It's just my name, annafarkas.com. And I do coaching. Sometimes I get people who are, checking in and saying, hey, what training program do I go to? And how do I find one that, what are the components that I want to look for? And so I do consultations and all sorts of other things, but you can find all that on my site.
Amazing. Thanks, Anna. And I'll do a little bit of my outro as well, just telling folks, if you want to know more about Mirari, we've got a free online community. So speaking of communities of care, you're welcome to join. Just go to Mirari, MIRARI.academy. And that's the same website for both the community. You can join that, or you can check out the foundation program. And the foundation program is technically called the Interdisciplinary Certificate in Psychedelic Practice. It starts the 22nd of September, and early bird discounts are available now, 25% off until July 23rd. So please apply if you want to take the they take us up on that opportunity. And yeah, just keep coming back here and reach out to Anna. These are really important topics to be talking about. Knowing yourself, knowing your skills, knowing what you can do to help people, and knowing where your remit scope of practice ends, and just supporting each other. This is a long process. This is taking years and years to grow and evolve individually, collectively, as a community. So just look after yourself and each other, okay? God bless, Anna. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. Thanks.
All right. Take care, everyone. Lovely seeing you. God bless.